Hey, good evening. My name is Andy Gmitter. I'm a storyteller with the Land of the Sky Storytellers. We run a Vampire the Masquerade LARP in Asheville, North Carolina. As of this filming, we're about a year into our 3-year chronicle, and we get a lot of questions from players about how the influence system works, how they can best use it, some niche questions and situations that come up from time to time. And in an effort to help new players to onboard to the system, I want to spend some time talking through what an influence is, how the system works, and some of our local rules interpretations for how this is going to go. To do this today, I'm going to be following the outline that you see here. I have some examples that we'll go through. You can see several of them called out. What I hope everybody will learn by the end of this is the very basics of how to use the influence system to cover the masquerade and provide a healthy game narrative for everyone, to know some of the most powerful ways that influences can be used, to provide an introduction to some of the technical terms that come up, and to avoid common player pitfalls. So at the end of this, I hope that everybody has at least a little bit better understanding. I just last opening note here. This is our interpretation in our game here in Asheville. Your local storytellers or storytellers running in Asheville in the future may interpret things differently. So always check with your storytellers to make sure that this is the way that they're interpreting things. Do not assume that what I'm saying applies to their game. Okay, so let's dive in. So right off the bat, let's talk about what an influence action actually is. When you're playing Vampire the Masquerade, you are a kindred who has supernatural powers and all sorts of mythos and all sorts of wild things. But sometimes your vampire is going to get parking tickets. When you need to interact with the mortal systems, government, business bureaucracy, religious organizations, when you need to interact with those systems, one of the best ways to represent that is with the influence system. So at its heart, the influence rules are all about how you manipulate mortal systems. They're not about manipulating individual mortals. They're not about manipulating opponents at Gather. They're about the systems that mortals have created. And before we continue, I want to break things down into two broad categories. You'll hear categories talked about a lot in the influences system, but usually you'll hear them sort of implied. People don't really talk about these as categories. They just talk about the fact that there are elite influence and underworld influence. For certain rules, it's important to know that you're acting within a specific one. We'll talk about those as they come up, but just be advised that as you're reading the rules for influences, you will see things like within the category, or you'll see things like across category. When they're talking about that, they're referring to doing stuff inside of one of the categories, like elite within the elite system, or using elite to manipulate the underworld system, or vice versa. And in case it's not obvious from the name, the elite system is for the upper crust of society, and the underworld is for the underworld of society. Both of those, the elite and the underworld, can exist in the same story. So for instance, you might have a situation where you have, say, a corrupt politician. That politician can be in the upper crust of society and can be in the underworld of society by virtue of their corruption. So it's not always a clear dichotomy. Sometimes it's a Venn diagram. But for the purposes of the rules, we treat them as separate when we need to. So how do you get influences? In order to best understand how to use them, we first have to know how to get our hands on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through in Yorick, which is the character building app that we use, how you can actually do that. I've set up a fake character here named Alice. Alice is a brand new character. You can see that they only have 30 XP available. They have spent none of it. They are brand new out of character creation. And they're interested in being a helpful neonate who's going to do influence things for the Nosferatu. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the backgrounds area. So here's the background section. You can see that we've got a backgrounds button, which I will click on. From character creation, Alice already has 3 free dots in Elite and 2 free dots in Underworld. We want Alice to be what we call a 5x5 influence build. This is very common for neonates to do. It's a really useful way to get useful very early on, and being useful is one of the best things you can do as a new player. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to take my Elite influences at 3, and up here you're going to see this slider. I'm going to move that to 5. I'm not going to touch this one. That's my free stuff from character creation. I'm going to ignore that, and I'm just going to click Save Changes. And I'm going to repeat for Underworld. I'm going to bump this up to 5, and I'm going to save changes. And I'm almost done. There's still a step that we have to take, but for now I just want to make the point that for a whopping 21 XP, we're already pretty helpful. So that's useful. The reason that we're not done adding things here to Yorick is that every time you add a dot of influence, be it Elite or Underworld, you have to add an accompanying specialization. In our game, the list of specializations is on our website. You can find the influence primer. And under that, you're going to see that there's a list of these specializations. So you can come on in here and you can pick what sounds best. For my example, I'm going to use a certain set. So let's hop back to our Google Doc. I'm going to scroll up, and you're going to see that Alice, being a 5x5 build, has arts, commercial, industry, entertainment, news media, and social media, and Elite. Sounds like this could be used for party planning. This could be used for festivals, things like that. And then in Underworld, they've got criminal organizations, emergency services, law enforcement, legal, and local government. It sounds like they might be interacting with the jail system or firefighters or all sorts of things like that. So we're going to go back into Yorick. We're going to scroll down to our background section again. So here's backgrounds. And you'll see that we have Elite influence and Underworld influence. I'm going to get started by clicking on Elite influence. You'll see that we don't have anything here, so we need to add a new one. And this is going to sound weird if you're not familiar with it, but I'm going to click Custom. The list that you see here is somebody else's list. We don't use this list. We use the list on the website. So we're going to click Custom. We're going to type Arts, Save Changes, and then we're going to click Save Changes a second time. And that's going to add Arts to our list. I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to click Custom, Entertainment, yeah. Save Changes, and Save Changes. Now I'm quickly going to pause, and I'm going to add the other 3. Okay, and there you have it. So I've added my 5 Elite. But again, we're still not done because remember we have 5 dots of Underworld influences, and we need to do that as well. So I clicked the back button just to get to home here. Now I'm going to scroll down to Backgrounds once more, and I'm going to click on Influence Underworld. And just like before, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to click Custom, and I'm going to start adding items. And it's going to work in just the same way, so you won't miss anything while I pause. Okay, and there you have it. I've got my 5 created here. If I click back to go to my character and I click Show Latest, you can see they've got, here's their 5, and here's all their specializations. So we've now successfully created a 5x5 influence neonate that is going to be very useful. Background XP is going to spend normal. So because I was a neonate, that only cost me 21 experience. The changes are going to be different based on whether you're Ancilla or Elder, but basically it works like any other background. I want to make a point about the specialization before I continue, though. We're going to talk later about the levels of actions that you can take. The first reason that those specializations matter is that when I use one of those specializations to do my action, I basically get to do it more powerful. We'll talk about this more later, but the basic idea is I get to act as if I had 6 dots instead of 5 dots, as long as I'm within that specialization. It's also going to be important for some specific actions later on. Suffice to say now that it's important to have, and you want to think about what your character is going to do in terms of the types of systems that they would want to manipulate, because whatever you put in for your specializations, they're going to be a little bit better at it. It doesn't mean that they can't do other stuff. For instance, we did not pick a cult. We did not pick transportation. That doesn't mean that Alice can't do those things. It just means that they're a little bit better at local government and things like that. Okay, so what are the parts of an action? When we actually talk about logging an action, what does that mean in terms of just stuff, the building blocks of what an action is? To do this, I'm actually going to hop over to the sheet. This is the live sheet that STs use for managing influence. So you see we've got a tab for elite right here. And I'm going to enter an action with you here. So this will have all the information that we need to capture for our actions. So let's say that in our example, Alice wants to use a level 6 action to make sure that we are getting a movie filmed in Asheville. Nice and easy example. I'm going to start by typing in today's date. So this is October 9th, 2025. Almost all the time, the date on an influence action is going to align to one of our gathers. There are exceptions, but just 99% of the time, just assume that the date is going to align to one of our gather dates. It makes things a lot easier. But today is the 9th, so I'm using the 9th. That action is 0 days old. We're going to say that this action was entered by, let's say, Ken Dances, who is one of my NPCs. I don't have Alice in our master spreadsheet, so just don't worry about it. Let's say Ken is helping out here. The specialization, let's say that this is going to be local government. Oh, no, this is a movie, so we want to make this entertainment. When you think about the specialization, you want to try to fit it to what's happening. And sometimes STs will need to negotiate that with you. Usually it's common sense. What's the action? I already said it's a level 6 action. It's called Everything Has a Price. We'll talk more about specific actions later. What are the details? To get a monster movie to be filmed in Asheville. Great. We'll talk more about blocks, but right now I'm just going to say that there are no blocks related to this action. And what that's going to do for us is it's going to create this. On October 2025, entertainment, level 6 elite, everything has a price. We used an action to get a monster movie to be filmed in Asheville, and then it has row E for elite 234. We're going to talk more about this later, but if we ever have to look up this action, we're going to need that number. So that's what that really helps. So we use this sheet to kind of build all that out. So let's just hit Control Z a bunch to get that out of here. There we go. And I'll close that so that we don't accidentally spill any secrets. So how do you log them? Now that you know the parts, now that you know that you're manipulating mortal influence systems, there's 2 ways to log influence actions. The first is to put them in your downtimes. Nice and easy, gives us a couple of weeks to prepare all the paperwork. The second method is that you talk to an ST at Gather. Usually they'll be running a scene, or you will have signed up to talk to them at the ST table, and you'll say, I'd like to do an influence action. Maybe there's some back and forth. Probably the ST is going to say, sounds great, let's do that. And then you have to remember the important final step. You have to add it to Discord. Message STs when you do this at Gather. If you do not send us a message, it doesn't get logged. If it doesn't get logged, it didn't happen. Doesn't matter if you agreed with an ST. There are a zillion things that happen at Gather. We don't remember them all. You need to do us a favor, document them when they occur so that we can add them to the system and then we have them for a reference. It's critical. It really is. Okay. So we talked about what an influence is. We talked about how you get them. We talked about how we log them and some of the mechanics. Let's actually talk about what you can do narratively and mechanically with all of this information. Influence actions are going to break down into 2, and I'm going to say this with a lowercase letter, groups. It's not a technical term. It doesn't appear in the book. But the book splits influence actions between general influence actions and targeted influence actions. All of these actions can interact. They can influence one another, interrupt one another, deal with one another. I'm going to try and take them all independently, but what I want you to understand at this point is that all the actions that we're about to discuss are happening in an ecosystem. And in any ecosystem, sometimes you have things bumping into each other, disrupting one another, being symbiotic with each other. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of those billions of combinations. Just know that we're trying to split these out and we're trying to make them individual for the purpose of teaching. In practice, there can be a lot of layers to this. So let's start with some simple examples. The general influence actions are going to be spelled out starting on page 512 of the rulebook. So it says general influence actions right here. And it's going to give you some introductions. It's going to talk about indirect influence attacks right up front. It just puts it right out there in front. We're going to talk about that later. It's really important to understand, but I think there's easier things to understand first. You can think of these level actions within Elite and Underworld as sort of an a la carte menu that you can do one little thing from at a time, and you can kind of build your influence game out of this. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to kind of talk about a few of the important ones. And I want to point out that within Elite, there are 10, and within Underworld, there are 10. So the level that you can do is going to correspond to the dots that you have. And if you have a specialization that's relevant, you can do one above your dots. So let's talk about some practical examples. The first one that I want to talk about is I want to talk about bureaucratic errors. This is a bread and butter. Everybody uses this. In my opinion, it gets overused. If my character, if Alice, has at least 3 dots in bureaucratic errors, excuse me, I misspoke. If she has at least 3 dots in elite influences, she can use the bureaucratic errors action. But if we go back to our list, look at Casey. You see that Casey is only at elite 2. Casey cannot use bureaucratic errors unless Casey is doing it within activist orgs or religious orgs. What bureaucratic errors is going to do for us, basically what it's going to do is it's going to make a piece of paper go somewhere that it's not supposed to go. So you might do this to like get somebody to have a parking ticket or to get access to medical information or something like that. Think about it as there is a piece of paper somewhere and it needs to go somewhere else or disappear or be conveniently, mysteriously hard to find for a couple of days. Think about that one piece of paper as a good orientation to this. Smooth over is another bread and butter activity. When masquerade breaches happen, and despite masquerade being in the title of the game, they do happen, you will need to smooth them over. You can do that by logging a smooth over action. So somebody used a big vampire power at the big music festival, you can smooth it over and you can say, oh, that was all special effects. No party crashers is another bread and butter one. This is something that you can do in advance to prevent masquerade breaches. There will almost always be one of these associated with the gather location where kindred are meeting up. So you can use no party crashers to basically make sure that there are not prying eyes, that you can control relatively the access to the building and things like that. This is used on a monthly basis. Okay, let's check my agenda. Let's see, we talked about smooth over, we talked about no party crashes. Gossip and insider trading. Gossip and insider trading is one of the most powerful actions that there is. You'll see it right here at level 2. Why would the level 2 action be so powerful? Well, it's so that people have access to it. As kindred use the influence system, gossip and insider trading can be used to learn what people are doing in the influence system. So let's go back to our Google Doc here. Let's say that Alice is doing shenanigans, and Alice is bragging about it, and talking about it, and taking credit for it, and getting loyal status for it, and Casey doesn't like that. Neither does Devin, neither does Eli. They can do some things about it, but one easy thing that they can do is they can enter a gossip and insider trading action, and what they will do is they will get back information related to these specializations. So if Alice were to log an action in entertainment, well, it doesn't look like any of our three antagonists here have entertainment. But if Alice were to log something, say, in news media, well, there's a chance that Ellie might learn about it because of that. So this is something that you can use to kind of pick up rumors. If you successfully find a rumor, you're going to get one of those pieces of text that I showed you earlier. Remember that it had E234 at the end of it. We're kind of typing out that example. You can go to a storyteller and you can say, I would like to use a dot of contacts to find out who did this. So Ellie could use that dot, find out that that action was performed by Alice, and maybe blackmail Alice over it. Maybe not. Who knows? It's not my game. There is a sibling action in Underworld for level 2. So if we scroll down here, you'll see Word on the Street. Same thing as Gossip and Insider Trading, except it hits the Underworld side, not the Elite side. I also want to point out that Lockdown is basically the same as No Party Crashers above. Illegal Favors is the other bread and butter action here. It does a lot. People tend to overuse it a little bit, but it does a lot. Okay. So we talked about how actions can have these levels associated with them, and we talked about how you can use them to manipulate the moral system. You know, you can make movies happen, parking tickets happen, all these sorts of things. Well, what if you wanted one of your enemies to get a parking ticket? What if you wanted them to, say, have a worse time because the mortals were causing problems for them? Indirect influence attacks is the best way to make that happen. What you can do is you can use this menu of actions and you can choose these actions. So as an example, let's say that I pick a level 6 action. I'm pulling strings. I'm making something happen in the mortal influence system. And when I pull those strings, I'm making it more difficult for, let's say, Francis to go about their daily or their nightly activities. You'll notice that Francis doesn't have any elite influence. They don't have any underworld influence. They don't have any other backgrounds. Well, what we might do, as an example, Alice, because they've been having problems with Francis, they might indirect influence attack Francis with 5 level 6 actions. So a level 6, a level 6, a level 6, a level 6, a level 6. It's a lot to send at. Let's take a look at the rules. Let's say that they all go through. We'll talk about why they might not later, but let's say they all go through. If the target of an indirect influence attack, if we apply a mechanical penalty, which is at ST discretion, sometimes we do narrative consequences, but if we do a mechanical consequence, we could cause them to lose 1 downtime action for every 2 levels of influence used in the general action. So for here, I'm going to come down to my notepad. So remember, we were doing a level 6. There's our actions. So we did 1, we did 2, we did 3, we did 4, and we're doing 5. Great. What we're going to do is for every 2 levels of influence used for that action, we're going to remove 1 downtime off of Francis. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that's going to remove 3 of Francis's downtimes. Now, if you know how downtimes work, you know that that's a pretty gosh darn big deal. Let's suppose, hypothetically, that Francis had a dot of computers and quick hands, quick work. So they could use 6 downtime actions whenever they wanted. Well, this next one, well, isn't that convenient? It's the same. They just lost the rest of their downtimes. Well, what do? We've got no more downtimes to lose. For every 2 levels of influences that were not paid in this manner, the storytellers may reduce one of the target player's other backgrounds by 1 dot. So let's suppose that Francis had a dot of contacts. Well, we could use this next action to start to disrupt those contacts, right? But remember, Francis doesn't have any other backgrounds. So what's going to happen is that the rest of those actions are going to cause them to lose blood. We at a minimum would have a player come on, excuse me, have a character come on the field with 1 blood. But you could imagine how the rest of this example is going to go pretty bad for Francis. Let's clean that up. We're going to talk more about this example later, but I need to introduce some other concepts before we do. For now, what I want you to understand is that indirect influence attacks can be really powerful for a short-term benefit. They can be politically dangerous as heck, and you should really plan carefully when you do that. We'll talk more about that later, though. Okay. So we talked about indirect influence attacks. We talked about the menu of 1 to 10s up here. Let's talk about these targeted actions. There are 4 of them. And when I use these words, I'm using them with a capital letter. You might look at these and you might think, well, attack, isn't that the same as indirect influence attacks? They are completely different. An attack is used to reduce another character's influence, where an indirect influence attack indirectly attacks by using influence. This attack just directly targets their influence. So here's an example of how this would work. Let's say that Alice and Bob are having some conflict. So Alice is going to log 4 attack actions because remember they've got 5, so they have 5 actions they can use. They're going to use 4 of them to just attack. Let's check back with the rules. Let's go find our attacks, and you'll see that you must spend 2 influence actions for each point you wish to remove, assuming you're within the same category, which we are, because we're talking about elites here. So Bob is only going to have 1 elite influence as a result of that attack. Bob's not losing downtimes, Bob's not losing blood, Bob's not losing other stuff, but everything here is going to go directly at those influences. That sounds pretty crummy, so wouldn't Bob want to do something about it? What Bob can do is Bob can defend. So let's take the same example. Let's say that Alice is going to send 4 actions at Bob, and Bob is he's got 3 actions, so Bob is going to, let's say that Bob defends with 1 action. Okay, so let's work this out. So Alice attacks, Alice attacks, Alice attacks, Alice attacks, Bob defends. Sound good? Okay. We know that because we're in elites, it's going to take 2 actions to reduce by 1 level. So right now, Bob has 2 levels worth coming at him. But let's check the defense text. Actions spent to defend an influence apply to all incoming attacks during that month, and they reduce the potential influence lost by 1 level. So Bob would be looking at losing 2 levels, but remember, Bob defends. So Bob defends 1. Oh, excuse me, mistyped. And 1's still going to get through. 2 minus 1 is 1. So Alice took 4 actions to try to mess with Bob. Bob used just 1 action. It was more efficient, but some still got through. So you can see how this attack and defend can be used to change what people are able to do. As an example, if Alice had been really worried that Bob was going to do something mean, Alice might attack Bob to make sure that those influence levels went down. Let's take the next example here and let's talk about boosts. Earlier I told you that the elite and underworld have this menu of a 1 to 10. And I told you that you can use actions up to your dots. So you can use up to the 5th action if you've got 5 dots. You can go up to 6 if you've got the 6th, if you can get it from your specialization. Why would they put a 10 in the rulebook if you can only ever get to 6? Boosts are what's going to make that happen. The way that boosts are going to work is that we're going to add up all of the boosts, and depending on how many you get, you can actually act at higher levels. So let's do some math. Let's say that there's been a lot of cooperation recently. Everybody's getting along, and they want to change some laws in Raleigh. They want to use a level 10 regional influence action to do that. So Alice is at 5 to start. In order to get boosted from a 5 to a 6, they need boosts equal to their current level. So they're going to need to accumulate 5 boosts. Let's say that Bob and Casey are using all of their elite actions to boost Alice. So 5, excuse me, so let's do it like this. So we're going to go from 5, we're going to get a total of 5, and that's going to put us up to level 6. So now we're at level 6. But we have more coming. Let's say that there's even more that's going to happen. Let's say that Devin and Ellie are going to throw in as well. All of their elite actions are going to go to boosting Alice. We were at 6. We're going to get boosts. 3 plus 3, that's 6. So now we're going to go up to 7. Francis still doesn't have any influence. They don't get to play here. Now let's say that Alice wants to take an action within their specialization. Because they're acting within a specialization, they're going to get to act as if they had the ability to use that 8. So they're going to get to a pop star meltdown. They're not going to get all the way to a 10. But you can see how accumulating these boosts is what you need to do to get there. When you get boosted, and remember, Alice got boosted to 7, you get 7 actions. All of your 7 actions can be used up to the 7th dot. So Alice could do 7 private collections if it suited them. But remember that they've got those specializations. They could actually do 7 level 8s. That can be pretty powerful, especially when you get up to regional influence levels, remember. So the number of actions that you can do is going to come from your effective level. That's going to be that 7 that we're talking about down below. But remember that you can do an action at 1 above if it's within your specialization. Okay, so now we got to talk about blocks. Blocks are one of the areas where we've had to make the most rulings as an ST staff of what you can and can't do. A block essentially says, I want to make it difficult for somebody to do something. I want to block their ability to do it. And there are 4 broad ways. That is not a capital letter W when I say ways, but there are 4 ways that you can really use a block effectively. The first is that you can block actions from appearing in other characters' gossip and insider trading and word on the street. Remember earlier when we had that example where Alice was using all of that influence to go after Francis? And remember they had all of those actions that were left over, and they were just going to have them go straight to Francis's blood and probably have some spillover, and it was going to be overkill, and it was going to be more than necessary. Francis probably is going to find out about that unless you block discovery of those actions. So Alice could put a block on any given action, and then it's going to be harder for other people to discover it. Well, how would you discover it? How do you overcome the block? Let's talk a little bit about that. So let's say that Alice is going to, actually it's not even important. Let's say that Alice does an action. It's great. We love this action. Doesn't matter what it is. It works the same for every action. Bob uses gossip and insider trading. And let's say that Alice did this within the specialization of, let's say that they did it within science and medical. When Bob uses gossip and insider trading, Bob's going to find out about all of the actions in science and medical that haven't been hidden from Bob. So Bob finds out. That's pretty powerful. Let's take a different example. Let's say that Alice does an action in science and medical. Let's then say that Alice blocks discovery with 2 blocks. So this is a total of 3 actions. There's the original action, there's a block on it, and then there's a second block. Let's say that Bob uses gossip and insider trading once. Bob is going to be prevented from seeing that because of those 2 blocks. The blocks are effectively going to cancel out his gossip and insider trading action so that he can't see that action. Let's say that he puts in the same action twice. Well, there's 2 blocks. The first block is going to block Bob's first action. The second block is going to block Bob's second action. Bob still doesn't know that Alice did shenanigans. Bob uses gossip and insider trading 3 times. Because remember, Bob's got 3 dots. Bob's got 3 actions. So Bob now, the first time they use it, run into the block. The second time they use it, run into the block. The third time they use it, they get over the blocks. So if you have more actions than there are blocks, you're going to overcome the blocks. Or said from the opposite perspective, said from Alice's perspective, if you have more blocks than there are actions, you prevent somebody from doing the thing that you didn't want them to do. So let's take another example of how blocks can be used, because that first one is only, oh, excuse me. Yes, blocking discovery. Okay, right. So that's the one that we just talked about. So this next one, let's say that Alice is going to be a little broader with what they're trying to do. This time Alice is going to block movies being filmed in Asheville. This is a little bit of a gray area, but a lot of different kindred in the game might say, well, I want to use influences to hire this company, or I'm going to use influences to get this star flown in so that they can be in this movie, or I'm going to use my influences to make this building available as a filming location. When Alice puts in a block to prevent people from filming movies in Asheville, it's going to hit all 3 of those actions. And again, unless those characters are putting in multiple actions to overcome the blocks, Alice is going to get her way. The third way that you can use a block is that you can block a specific listed action on this menu. So as an example, there's an action called free travel here. Alice could just block free travel. That's it. Nobody gets to free travel unless they put in multiple actions to overcome that block. It's not a gray area. It's not about, well, really that was about architecture. It wasn't about filming, or, really this was about finance. It wasn't about, none of that happens. It's a numbers game. If you put in more free travels than Alice put in blocks, you get to free travel. If you don't get to free travel. The final example that I want to use is about blocking indirect influence attacks. Earlier I had this example where Alice was going to go hard at Francis and was going to make sure that Francis paid for some sort of slight or something like that. Well, let's just say that hypothetically, Devin, whom we really haven't talked about a lot in this, Devin is actually going to defend Francis in this case. And you can even hear how this sometimes accidentally happens. I shouldn't have said defend, because remember, defend is a specific thing down here. And I'm not talking about defending. I'm talking about blocking. So what we might do is we might have Alice put in those indirect influence attacks, but Devin says, I'm going to register a block for people, against people indirect influence attacking myself, Ellie, and Francis. You can name yourself and a number of kindred totaling the number of dots that you have. So in this case, Devin can say, I'm going to protect these 3 people with my block. Let's see how that would have worked out. Let's come back to our examples from indirect influence attacks. Earlier we talked about how Alice was indirect influence attacking Bob. And we had a 6, we had a 6, we had a 6, we had a 6, and we had a 6. So Alice is going to indirect influence attack Francis with 5 level 6 actions. But let's now suppose that Bob is going to put 2 blocks to protect Francis from indirect influence attacks. This action is registered once. It's going to run into Bob's 2 blocks, and it's going to fail. The same thing is going to happen for the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. If you send all 6 of these as different actions because you want to have the maximum impact as an indirect influence attacker, you can be foiled by little stumbling blocks, pun intended. Another way that Alice could do this, though, is that Alice could actually use the indirect influence attacks against Francis, but submit 5 of the exact same level 6. So in this case, let's work it out like this. So there's a 6, there's a 6, there's a 6. And these are all the same action. Well, Bob put up a block of 2, you'll remember. The first one is going to run into the block. The second one is going to run into the block. And the last 3 are going to get over. The way that you construct indirect influence attacks, the way that you construct your blocks can be very, very fiddly. Speaking editorially, this doesn't come up a lot. Usually we don't have to get this far into the weeds. But when we do get into the weeds, you can imagine that it matters a whole heck of a lot to Francis's player, so we really try to get it accurate. Think about what you're doing as you're setting these up. Alice could have attacked harder, but left themselves available to discovery, or vulnerable against a block. Alice could have attacked very conservatively, been mindful of discovery, been mindful of blocks, and tried to navigate around those things. There are ways that you can get caught doing this. So think about the way that you construct this. You don't want to treat this as just throwing everything plus the kitchen sink at them. Be mindful and realize that these other mechanics do interact. So we talked a lot about all sorts of different examples and how all of this can work. An influence system in our game is fundamentally the way that kindred manipulate mortal systems. They can do this in the elite or in the underworld categories. Sometimes it's important to note that you're staying in one category. Sometimes it's important to note that you're crossing categories. I advise you to check the rules. I'm mostly stuck to elites just to kind of avoid that as an edge case, but be advised that that is something you need to be aware of if you are really going to dig into the influence systems. We talked about how you can get these on your character sheet. We talked about how you get a number of actions equal to your dots. You can act at the level equal to your dots unless you're acting within a specialization. If you do that, you're effectively acting one above. We talked about how we have to log when it happens, who does it, the category, the action, the specialization, and whether any blocks are associated with it. I hope by now you understand how important those blocks are and why we have to capture them. Oh, and this is I should have said this earlier. Blocks fall off at the end of the month. So if you're trying to hide something, you have to keep hiding it until it no longer appears in gossip and insider trading or word on the street. So just bear that in mind. You don't get to block it once and then you're fixed forever. You gotta maintain that block. But that's a tangent. Let's move back to the summary. You can do this at Gather or in your downtimes. It is gosh darn important that you remember to put this in Discord if you do it at Gather, though. There is a menu of actions that you can use. Some of your bread and butter actions are going to get you information or preserve the masquerade. You can use indirect influence attacks to mess with your enemies. Be mindful of blocks and be mindful of discovery when you do that. And you can also interact directly with other people's influences by attacking, defending, boosting, or blocking. Influences are a complicated system. It presents this sort of rich unknown for your character. You'll never really know if another character is going to be blocking something or if another character is waiting to discover something. You'll never know if an NPC is interacting with the influence system. But all of this creates this, this sort of high risk environment where you could put yourself out there. Maybe you run into trouble, maybe you get discovered, maybe you run into difficulty, things like that. But the rewards of using the influence system are high because you saw what happened to Francis when just one person acted. Imagine when people get together and they use the system and they think carefully about the way that they're using it. Imagine the information that they could expose through gossip and insider trading and word on the street. There's a lot that you can do with the influence system if you understand the basic building blocks. And even if you don't understand the basic building blocks, you can still smooth stuff over and you can still make paper move in the way that it's supposed to move. If you have any questions, you can join our Discord or you can check out our website, lotslarp.org. Again, my name is Andy, and I hope to see you at a game sometime. Thank you.